One of the things I like to do when we start a group is tell a little bit of the For Networking story. For a couple of reasons. It gives you as visitors a bit of an idea of where we're coming from, because what happens is I find I go out and I say I run a networking organisation, and straight away people put us in the box, their networking box, whatever that is. One of the questions that I'm often asked is, what did I do before For Networking? And people think, how did you get into this networking game? And for me, my background is actually psychology. I have a master's from Macquarie, and I worked in the counselling field for many years. One of the other things that my wife and I also did is own a cafe for a while. Who here has a kind of a burning, a little desire inside of them to own a cafe? Go on. Yeah, there we go. Sophie does. What about the guys? Who would like to own a pub and just kind of lean around, sit on the bar all day, dispensing your wisdom to the world? Well, I think a lot of people have this is what our idea of running cafes and pubs is like. The reality is very different. So my advice, if you ever want to run a cafe, buy a cafe. If you're thinking about it or your partner's thinking about it, here's my advice. I'll give you this for nothing. Don't. Not unless you grew up with parents who ran a cafe or you've managed a cafe. It is really hard work, 7 days a week, and you've got a lot of staff, high turnover industry. You don't know if you're going to have 100 people in or 10 people in today. It's a lot of work. One of the things I learned from there is I very quickly went on the steep learning curve of small business. When we were busy, we'd have like 30 staff. We had a few extra things involved with the business, and so I know what it's like to be facing lease payments and juggling finances and drawing on a credit card here and doing things to make payroll and all those sorts of things. I've been through that, and I'm quite happy not to do that again for a while. But we learn a lot, and it was good. But it was interesting because we were both working outside of the business. We had someone looking after it, and I was doing family court work. And being in the business, I started to see some things that I didn't see before. And one is I'd have a lot of clients who were coming in and they owned their own business. They were self-employed. And it's like they couldn't afford to separate because they were self-employed. They had leases on vehicles, they had a workshop or whatever, a factory or whatever. Just financially, they had directors' guarantees on things. They weren't in a position to separate. It was too tough on them. So they'd have to kind of stick with me and work out their issues. And one thing I noticed is over time, as I helped them in their relationship, their business would improve. And usually, like, what I started to see is that when people's relationships were under high levels of stress, then their business would be under stress. If you're employed in corporate and you're going through a tough time, you've got people around you who can kind of help carry you for a little bit. You can they know that you're having a tough time and they can help carry you, and there's a lot of systems in place. When you're self-employed and you're having a real tough time and you're not making the phone calls, you're not paying the bills, you're not sending out the invoices, you're not doing all the things you're supposed to, then your business starts suffering because you're under a lot of stress. And I found that helping people in their relationship, their business would improve. Business can be tough and it can get you down. And that's one of the reasons, that's why when people say, why did you start For Networking? It's because that's the connection for me. I've seen how tough it is personally. I've seen how tough it is for other people. And I really like seeing people thrive. I like helping people. And that's what For Networking is about. We're not actually a network, we're a community, more than a network. We're building a community of people who actually give a toss about each other and who want to help each other out and advocate and support one another. And share the wins and help in the losses. So I've seen it in the network where people have come in and they've been struggling, and other people have come around and helped them out. They've thrown them a bit of work, they've gone out of their way to make some connections for them, and their business has changed. One of the big things I think about For Networking is people say, do you measure referrals and all that? We don't, and there's a whole bunch of rationale for that. But what we say is we're 50% social and 50% business. So we don't want to just be so focused on business that we forget about the person. but we don't want to be just social where there's no business. We create a relaxed culture. We encourage people to meet outside the meetings. And it's often when you get to know people socially, you actually get to trust them. So, recently one of our members gave a referral to one of our bookkeepers. That company turns over $20 million. Good client of the finance broker. He's not going to refer someone to that person if she's not going to come up with the goods, because it's going to risk his reputation if she does a bad job. But he knows, because he's got to know her over time, that she won't. Has anyone heard of a guy, Tony Hsieh? He's written a book called Rediscovering Happiness. He sold his first company to Microsoft for $260 million, sold his second to Amazon for just over $1 billion. So he's a player, right? You'd think he knows a thing or two. Be interested to know what his view on networking is. He says, focus on building relationships and getting to know people just as people, regardless of their position in the business world or even if they're not from the business world. He says, my advice is stop trying to network in the traditional business sense. He says, instead, try to build up the number and depth of your friendships. So look to build deeper relationships where the friendship itself is its own reward. And that's really what we're about for networking. We're about making connections and friends, not for what I can get out of you. I don't want to network with you because I think you're in a role where I can get something out of you. I want to network with you because I'm genuinely interested in you and I connect with you and I want to build that relationship. He says, the more diverse your set of friendships, the more likely you'll derive both personal and business benefits from them. You won't know exactly what those benefits will be, but if your friendships are genuine, those benefits will magically appear 2 to 3 years later down the road. So there's two takeaways from what I see with Tony Hsieh. One is network with people that you actually like and you connect with. And don't network to get something, network to build the relationship. And the other is networking takes time. And we know, I can give you lots of stories of people who've been for networking for 2 to 3 years and the benefits that they've got from it. So that's what we're about, that's who we are, and that's what my hope is for Chatswood. So thank you for listening.